Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This week, I have an exciting guest. And actually, I think every time I have a guest, it's exciting. But I like to say it anyway because it feels nice. And so with me this week, I have Susan Snipes, who is the head of people at Remote People, a global recruitment agency that specializes in direct placements for US-based and Europe-based companies looking to hire remote workers across the globe. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Traci. It's great to be here.
Amazing. I'm so glad you're here. And, global hiring continues to be a huge topic. It's something that I think can often be met with either some misunderstanding and sometimes a little bit of confusion. And I say that because I have seen where people are like so excited about global hiring, as they should be, if you ask me. And then I've seen people who have the opposite of an abundance mindset and are worried that they are going to lose their jobs to quote unquote offshore hiring, which I think is really a very narrow way to look at it, because when we hire globally, that means we're expanding our opportunities to learn from people in different backgrounds and all of that good stuff. And I know we're going to talk a lot about Remote People and specifically how companies can hire globally without a ton of friction or red tape, because of course there's a lot operationally that comes in to play when hiring globally. So maybe we start with, what Remote People does and, specifically as an employer of record, which you'll get into, I'm sure, what that actually means and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Remote People is not only an international recruitment firm that helps place remote workers in 150 plus countries, but we also offer employment of record services. And so, employer of record is the employer for legal and tax purposes, and you would partner with an employer of record when you want to hire in multiple countries, but you don't want to have to set up your own local entity effectively. So we offer both the recruitment and the employer of record services.
Amazing. I think it's really helpful to have that understanding, because I think I shared with you when we first spoke before recording that my first experience even using an employer of record has been in the last 3 years, and I've been in HR for over 10. And so I just think it's probably very likely that there are listeners who have only worked in companies who have established local entities in various parts of the world. And so having an understanding of what that is can help. And my understanding too is that creating or establishing local entities is quite challenging, especially depending on the country you're looking to hire in. And then that's like, is that one of the reasons why people would potentially look at an EOR or employer of record versus establishing their own business presence?
There are lots of good reasons, but you definitely hit the nail on the head, with one of the reasons being that it is time consuming and expensive to get local entities formed and set up in place in these different countries. And a lot of times companies, they just want to focus on what they do best. They want to focus on their operations. They want to focus on making money. They don't want to focus on all of the administrivia and overhead of figuring out how to get set up in different countries, especially when they don't need to reinvent the wheel, because there are already companies out there that will hire your employees for you and employ them for you and take away a lot of the administrative burden. So that's part of it. Another good reason would be maybe you want to hire completely, I'm sure I'm going to say this more than once in this podcast, but hire without borders and have employees irrespective, like regardless of where they are located in the globe, maybe you just want to be able to hire the top talent wherever they are. And so you may have one employee in Argentina, one employee in China, one employee in Pakistan, one employee in Canada, and you want to have the freedom to do that without setting up a bunch of different entities. That's another great reason to go with an employer of record. And it's also a great way to just test a market too. So say you are wanting to build out a sales team in Switzerland. You've never worked in Switzerland before. You don't know how to reach the customers there, but you need to hire local salespeople so you can reach the customers there. It's a great way to test the market to see if that's going to be successful for you or not, going with an employer of record since that's already set up and already in place.
That's a really good point. It does make me think about what I kind of talked about at the top of the recording, which is that there is such a benefit to hiring globally. I see it as something that should instill a sense of pride in people when you work for a global organization or when you have colleagues who are all across the world, because I think this is one of the greatest benefits of a more remote culture these days, where people can work from home, and you do have the ability to hire the best and the brightest, as I like to say, wherever they live, regardless of where they live. And I don't know. I've seen recently where people, and of course there have been layoffs, and there are always changes in the job market in the U.S. and around the world. But I've seen where people will talk about global hiring strategies without this more positive or optimistic lens, maybe because they've been affected or they perceive to have been affected by global hiring strategies. Because of course, when there's access to talent anywhere, there are certainly advantages in hiring in different places around the world compared to more expensive locations like maybe some other parts of Europe or in the US. That said, though, when we think about like this evolution of global hiring, and how much the workplace has been transformed by this ease of hiring, let's say, especially with thanks to EORs, how do you see the landscape having changed in the last few years? And maybe it's also like, how has it changed and how will it continue to change?
Definitely. And also to speak to the concern that some people have about outsourcing and people losing their jobs. And I'll say that the number one reason that we're hiring in other countries for people that we're doing recruiting is because there's a talent shortage. There's a shortage of talent. Like, for example, we help AI companies hire AI talent in uh, multiple countries around the world, but not necessarily in the US because there's a talent shortage here. And so, that's a common misconception that people have, is that it's all about saving money, although it is a cost savings as well, like to your point, and companies are seeing that they can have that strategic advantage by hiring in places with lower cost of living,
Hmm.
especially if people have the same credentials, the same skill set. Uh, it does seem like a better deal to go that route. Other changes that I've seen just in the technology and in the way that we work. We have the project management applications, the instant messaging applications. We have all of these tools that provide the appropriate level of oversight needed depending on how much oversight you feel like you need to have over your remote workforce. You can have that now because the technology is there. And so people are less worried about accountability and having people not seated directly next to you. Remote hiring in general is on the rise. And something I heard a recruiter say that what she's seeing is that uh, in the US, about a third of all people that they're hiring for have a strong preference for remote work.
Mm.
And then another third is remote hybrid. And so you're looking at only
Yeah.
about a third left that's interested in physical in-person work. Um,
Wow.
but there just aren't the remote jobs there to support that. So that's where it's trending, is more and more remote jobs, more and more remote work, but it's not trending fast enough for all of the employees who enjoyed remote work during the pandemic and didn't want to go back and still don't want to be back. And so
Yeah.
I'm seeing that as well.
Very interesting. And I appreciate you helping us to see what, within this landscape, what is really generating this interest and the need to hire globally. And when there is a talent shortage, I mean, you can't just always work without, like with a -1. Businesses obviously have to continue to operate. And so if you're going to you either have the option of always being a person down or being strategic and finding that person potentially in a completely different country or halfway around the world. Um, you mentioned at the top of the recording that, or at the top of the podcast, that um, one of the benefits to working with an EOR or having an EOR as a vendor within a company are the legal and the tax benefits. Can you kind of help us to understand how companies kind of overcome those complexities between like taxes and legal compliance, and maybe even payroll, because of course that's connected between both? How does an EOR help with those things?
So rather than having to rely on a local a local accounting firm to handle all of the taxes, and a local law firm to handle all of the formation, and another specialization of law firm to handle all your employee relations issues. You can have one point of contact. And in particular, with remote people's employer of record services, we have a dedicated account manager. So people are getting that one point of contact. And even just within the employer of record, I know that's a pain point, some people have with some of those other folks out there who I won't mention, but they will send you to just whoever is on the chat at the time is who you're talking to, and they have no context about your workforce. It's whoever's on the AI chat bot, whatever human jumps on there, that's who you get. And so we don't have that problem at Remote People, which is nice.
Nice. Um, it does make me think about, like, if you can share even an example of how a company maybe that's worked with you, or even just in your experience in general, if there's like a real world example of a company that's scaled globally. Because again, to share my own experience, I joined the tech company that I work for 3 years ago, and I had never had an experience with an EOR. And we were scaling, and I had joined as we had already established working with this particular organization. And there are certainly I think the benefits are really important, and also understanding that there are companies that have done it, like really big companies probably too, that continue to scale globally. So I'm curious if you have the inside
Yes.
scoop.
Yes, I'll just name drop briefly. Two names people have probably heard of are IBM and Boeing, and those are, two of our customers who we've helped to hire global talent
Oh.
and, give them that competitive advantage. So,
Oh, we love a name drop here at the
yeah.
podcast, at the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you for sharing. Love it. Love an inside scoop. And speaking of competitive advantage, I'm curious, like, are there specific industries? Because of course the listeners kind of span all industries and even all types of HR roles. And I'm curious to know if there are companies, or I should say industries, excuse me, that are better suited for leveraging an EOR to scale their businesses.
So I will say the majority of our customers tend to be SaaS companies, so they're in the
Hmm.
tech industry. And I think a lot of that has to do with the tech industry's readiness to hire remote workers. It's
Sure.
something that they've been doing for years and years now. It's not new to them. There are obviously some industries that are uh, just from a practical perspective, there may only be a very few number of positions where people even could work remotely, like the construction industry. You're only going to have maybe there's some admin type positions or some project management type positions where some of the work can be done remotely, but the reality is that a lot of that has to be done in person. But in addition to the tech industry, I mean, on our website, we have all the different industries that we've supported so far, and there's a good 20 plus industries listed out there. So, including healthcare, believe it or not.
Wow.
So, there are certain types of roles that you have to ask yourself, is there any reason that this position would have to be on site? Really? Like, is there really a reason that for all the employers that are making everybody go into the office, do they really need to be there? Why are we doing this? These are questions we have to ask ourselves.
Absolutely. I ask those questions all the time. Every week I feel like there's another large company that's saying we're forcing, and I use that word very intentionally, forcing our employees to go back. And like you and I, we're HR people. We know even if we were in person, we or like hybrid, we know that requiring or mandating in-person work when people are so used to working remotely these days, especially in the industries that you've kind of already named, there's there's no there's no world in which that like recipient of that information, the employees at the end of that decision are like super happy that their employer is just telling them what to do. Like I can't imagine saying to myself as a, in HR, as an HR professional, I'm going to tell all of these employees that they have to return to work 5 days a week in person and it's going to go really well. Like I can't imagine that, So it does make me wonder why so many companies are pushing for this and really kind of missing the mark in terms of how they bring their teams into solving whatever problems they feel they're solving by bringing people back 100%.
Conspiracy theory. I this is my husband's conspiracy theory on this, that they have so much real estate that they deduct the costs for tax purposes, and they need to have people actually working in these buildings that they're deducting from
Mm.
their tax. Like otherwise their expenses become too low, and then they have issues with their taxes. That's the theory. I'm not qualified to speak on this topic. It is a conspiracy theory.
I love that your husband has a conspiracy theory on this. I mean, it's a very interesting point. I don't know that it's so far fetched because, I mean, the corporate real estate market right now, from my understanding, is not so great because there are so many office buildings that are just vacant and so many retail spaces just vacant. That's really interesting, though. And I am, as someone who has virtually no experience in tax law or anything like that, I wonder, like, well, if they're working hybridly or in a hybrid way, does that not count? Like, do they have to go
Sure.
back 100%?
Yeah, can't we give people flexibility benefits, you know?
Right, right. Like, why not allow people to come in when on whatever day works for them? Maybe you say, okay, at least 1 day a week. You get your tax benefit or whatever. If we're going to go with that, I say we go with it. And, maybe on that 1 day, that's when you're having like your all hands or your team meeting. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think that sometimes companies they're pushing their own interests too hard on employees because at the end of the day, like when I think about what shifts we saw during like the COVID time, for example, it was very reflective of employees being in the driver's seat and employers kind of being on in the passenger side and allowing the employee to kind of drive the landscape forward. And from that, we got a lot of obviously remote benefits. Many people continue to work remotely and people have shifted their experiences, have pivoted in industries as a result of being able to work remotely too. All of that said, though, I think now we're seeing, the pendulum swung all the way that way. And now the pendulum is, well, they're attempting to swing the pendulum all the way to the other direction. And I feel like it's just a little bit more complex than saying, okay, every single person has to go in the office. And especially when we think about, again, this like global hiring strategy, if that's the case for these larger businesses, then they have to think about how they engage their global workforces. And if they require, in office work from, let's say, US or Canadian employees, how do they then take that and replicate it globally if they don't really have, a larger cohort in particular areas, especially if they're using an EOR? So I just, I think I think it's a little bit of a reach to expect that people are just going to be happy doing whatever their company wants them to do. I don't know. I feel a little strongly on that.
Yes, well, and it backfires. It will backfire because as more and more employers move towards offering remote work, at some point it's it's going to go from being just this awesome perk that you're lucky if you can get to expected.
Yeah.
For certain roles. It's going to be expected, and you're going to have a really hard time hiring people if you're going to put your foot down and say, no, this is on-site, in-person work.
Totally, totally. And I mean, I get it. I've had guests on who have talked about, generational differences in the workplace and how remote work and in office work, hybrid, whatever, are sometimes do vary depending on generation, or the generation, represented. And interestingly, Gen Z sometimes, or more often than not, I should say, wants all of the flexibility to determine what their work week looks like, while also having the opportunity to be in person as often as they want and to be remote as often as they want. And you have other generations in the workplace who are kind of polarized on that. It's like either fully remote or fully in person. And then Gen Z comes in saying, well, we kind of want options for all of it, and we want full, autonomy and determination. So I think, coming back to
But,
this, yeah, go ahead, please.
but a lot of times for Gen Z, where they're working is all they've known. So if they're
Yeah,
working in person and that's their exposure to being employed, that's all they've known. So their objection to it might not be as strong as a millennial that is like, look, I've done both. I've worked both. I've worked remote, I've worked on site. Remote works better for me and my work-life balance and you know, just I think there is something there to like having less experience in the workforce and uh less of a point of reference to be morally outraged. No. Uh,
I love it. No, it's true. I mean, I was just talking to my sisters-in-law about stuff like this, where it's like, what is the benefit of experience? And when we first start out in our careers, we have we especially depending on the type of training people have, if they've gone to school for the careers that they've had, if someone's in HR and maybe they've held internships or whatever, however we want to apply this, that it's like, yeah, you have a certain level of experience and you kind of know what you want out of your career, you have a certain expectation for yourself, and all of that is true, and you are a qualified individual. And yet when someone has 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years of experience, they have all of that plus all of like this knowledge and information that someone with much less experience doesn't have. And so it's like, how do we appreciate the experiences that we all eventually gain while actively putting in the years of tenure? It's an interesting, it's almost like complex, because we all are in a place in our careers where we have a certain amount of experience and we want something specific. And then there will always be people with more experience who also want something specific. And that's not always like a match made in heaven. And so it's like, how do you reconcile all of that? To me, it's like, okay, we'll offer flexibility and everyone can be as close to happy as possible, because you're never going to make everybody happy. Yeah, that's tough.
Wow,
But
that elusive happiness.
I know. Employee engagement, happiness, fulfillment. Like, how do we get everybody happy? All the buzzwords. No, but I really appreciate that we've, kind of dug into this idea of how the landscape, has changed and will continue to change. And it does also, make me think further about some of the complexities when it does come to, a company hiring internationally. Coming back to this, obviously from a tactical operational standpoint, there are all those challenges that you mentioned, which, certainly enable companies to look in the direction of an EOR to reduce those challenges. But from like a cultural standpoint, what are your thoughts around how companies can navigate those types of challenges hiring internationally? Like, is there a way that companies can future ready themselves or be as prepared as possible to bring on talent in various parts of the world where people have different cultures and beliefs and practices, because that certainly has an impact.
Yeah, so you still want to recruit for people whose values align with your company's values
Mm,
and, people whose work ethic aligns with what you're looking for in an employee. You still want to thoroughly vet people. Um, there are there are certain realities that you may need to be willing to accept and be flexible as a global employer. You're going to hire people in other countries where they have a lot more entitlements than we have in the US. They have a lot more time off, a lot
yeah.
more banking holidays. There may be religious observances depending on the country that go on for a month at a time.
Hmm.
I mean, there are certain operational realities that you have to prepare for depending on where you're looking to hire. Um, but all in all, just to be able to have 24/7 support because you have people in all the time zones
It's
that you need
amazing.
to have them in. It's great. And you don't have to worry about, oh no, we're hiring people for this third shift or this undesirable shift because for them it is a desirable shift.
Right.
Um, and they don't have to work at odd hours if you're 24/7. Or if you're not 24/7 and you're hiring in a country and the hours are a little off, the compensation that you're offering probably is enough to offset the inconvenience on their part. Plus, you're still saving money depending on where you're hiring. So
Yeah.
I may have gone a little off topic there.
No, you didn't. I think it's really helpful. And actually, it makes me think of probably one of my last questions for you, which is really like how we can give some advice maybe to HR professionals who are listening and maybe thinking about how they look at the future of remote work, how they think of the future of global hiring. Because I think you've said a lot of really important things, that this is all about strategy. Like, how do companies best set themselves up so that they can continue to have a competitive advantage and continue to scale and grow. So, with that, what advice do you have for those listening, and how, especially, and I should say HR leaders and other business leaders, in terms of navigating this future of remote work and also just global hiring in general?
I'm going to say it again. We're going to hire without borders. We
Amen.
are going to get the best and brightest wherever they may be located on planet Earth. And we're not going to stress about it because we have the support of global recruitment agencies and employers of record, whether you're needing to hire someone as a contractor or due to compliance issues, you need to hire them as an employee. There are companies out there, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can leverage the resources that already exist. You don't have to do this from scratch and just, lean in and find the best vendors with the best value proposition for you and your organization, and you'll do great things.
I love it. Hire without borders. I think that's fabulous. Susan, thank you so much for all of your insight and for sharing more about what you do and what Remote People does. And so I'd love to give you the opportunity to tell listeners where they can learn more about you as well as Remote People.
Sure. Well, I'm not super important, but I will tell you that if you want to learn more about Remote People, you can go to remotepeople.com. We sure snagged that domain.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
We did.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's not .net, it's not .org, it's .com. I love it. And you
legit.
are important. You are important. You are Susan Snipes. You're important. Everyone's important. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I think it was such a helpful conversation. Actually, I think this is the first time that we've even talked about EORs and probably global hiring in this way. So I really, really appreciate you educating all of us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Traci.
Of course. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.